Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here in June. A very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching, and welcome to Sunday's edition, yes, Sunday already, of the dceu Daily. If you're feeling charitable, please smash the subscribe button and the like button, and please follow me on Twitter at MoviesTVMad. So the main sandwich of today's dceu Daily is ranking the modern day Superman movies, which also includes Justice League and BVS, if you were wondering. And I'm going to give honourable mentions to my top 3 favourite live-action Superman actors of all time. And maybe, if I've got enough time, we'll talk about a couple of my favourite animated ones as well, which we've done before on this channel. But first, we need to talk about David Ayer, because there's no getting away from it. David Ayer is aggressively trolling Warner Brothers, and ever since he set his social media accounts up, he's really been working hard to educate the public how Warner Brothers did him bad. But this is something on another level. Not even Zack Snyder's done this. Right, let's have a look at this. So David Ayer's got that thinking emoji over this, quote tweeting this from Eric Marino. We need a proper, at Marvel, Neymar, the Submariner movie. I'm sure US Navy CNO Chivno would let us borrow a Virginia-class Marvel Studios. Now, David Ayer was part of the Marines or the Army in his younger life. He's very passionate about talking about his time in the forces or whatever he was in. So anyway, Gokhan comments down below. This is just a random, like the other guy is. Well, at least you won't have to reshoot anything since you'll just follow Marvel Studio specifications, like the other Marvel directors, and maybe add a pinch of yourself into it. It would be acclaimed under the MCU banner, but for me, James Wan did the Aquaworld first. So good. So good luck. That's an interesting one. So he quote tweets this, David Ayer, and he says, Marvel is pretty smart. They account for additional photography in the process. They assemble after principle and then rip it apart again and reshoot. It's a smart way to structure process. So what David pretty much is saying, that Warner Brothers don't do this, or that Warner Brothers didn't do this with his Suicide Squad movie. So basically what Warner Brothers seem to do is, and I don't know what they're doing anymore, or what they did with MOS or BVS or the other movies, but what David is saying is that going back to reshoot is part of the Marvel plan. So what they do is, this is our story, this is how we've written it, you're going to film it, and then we're going to look at it, and then we're going to go back and decide what we're going to take out, and what new kind of scenes we're going to pick up from, add. And he's saying it's all planned. It's not a surprise that Feige and Marvel Studios plan everything out. Now, what he's trying to convey here is, Warner Brothers literally take a script, they shoot a movie, then they say, yeah, well, the last film was a bit negative, we didn't do so well, it's too serious, you've got to take that one out, you've got to take all this Joker out, we're not sure about this Joker, right? So they literally cut stuff, and then basically they work off the seat of their pants and start getting the creative to pen new scenes and stuff. So it's not planned, and that's the difference. That's why there was problems with BVS. That's why there was problems with Justice League, because they look at what the creative is doing. They're a bit scared by it at times, as Zack explained at SnyderCon as well. Then they want to do a redo. A redo isn't a pickup, isn't reshoots. You're literally restructuring your movie. But because Feige is up and down in charge of this studio, and he has a plan and he knows what he's doing, whether you agree with the love for the MCU and all of that, it is structured and it's organised. So David Ayer is not only giving Marvel credit, he's not only trolling Warner Brothers, but he's looking for a job. So that's very interesting, but he doesn't stop there. Let me just try and find something. Right, this is something else. Every film project has what is called a final cutting authority. This is usually a studio head who has final say over the picture. It's Hollywood 101. A director has limited creative rights. Normally, it works very collegially. So basically, he's saying the creative can do what he wants, but then the person who's in charge of the studio can cut it all out. Now, listen. It's all very well saying a director at a studio doesn't have much authority. They don't at Marvel, right? I think the guy who did Iron Man and Iron Man 2, Jon Favreau, probably had a lot more authority at the time. And he was quite inexperienced, let's not forget that. But someone like Christopher Nolan, who did his trilogy. Yeah, Warner Brothers would have had someone saying, you know what, mate, we're worried about this and that. I mean, there was a situation where they felt... Now, Christopher Nolan in Batman Begins didn't want a Batmobile. So Warner Brothers said, look, Chris, you can't have a Batman film without a Batmobile. And he goes, yeah, but I don't like the idea of a Batmobile. So they said, okay then, if you had to redesign a bat car or whatever, a vehicle, what would you do? And he told them what he wanted. And ultimately, what he came up with was brilliant, of course. Absolutely fantastic. But if it wasn't for Warner Brothers in that instance, we wouldn't have had that amazing design for a new age Batmobile. Do you know what I mean? So that intervention from Warner Brothers was good. Those interventions are important. But when whoever's in charge of deciding whether a film goes as is or if it needs major changes starts interfering with the creative process, this is the problem. Nolan was in charge, basically, of Man of Steel. So no one was going to get between Zack Snyder and the vision of the film that he wanted to direct. Nolan's name was on it, and Nolan wasn't going to be embarrassed by these idiots. BVS, even though Nolan was an executive producer, the problem was he wasn't there. He wasn't there to protect Zack's vision. And this is why that went wrong. Suicide Squad went wrong. The problem was no one was really in charge apart from the studio heads. It's different now because Walter Hamada is the head. He has a vision. He has a plan. That's why it's going a little bit smoothly. The problem with Birds of Prey was Walter had this situation where you've got a prominent artist like Robbie saying, I want an SJW feminist movie. Or she obviously didn't say it in so many words. But because they didn't want to lose her or piss her off, they gave her what she wanted. They didn't give her much money for the movie. And they made sure that whatever it was going to lose, and they knew it would lose with the way she wanted to do it, that the damage was minimal. It still made more money than it cost to make. And so, as I say, the damage was minimal there. So this is really what David's trying to say. Look, David's extremely pissed off. And I don't blame him. The way he was treated is probably worse than Zack. And I mean, he's still getting, bad commentary on that Suicide Squad movie. And it wasn't really his movie. He shot the sequences, but it was pretty much not edited by him. And they cut so much of that Joker stuff, which really would have made a difference and would have made people love Jared Leto's Joker. And so really, Jared Leto was done badly, and so was David Ayer. And I think that's what David is alluding to. So I think David's going to carry on trolling Warner Brothers, and quite right too. When you've been betrayed like David and Zack have, that's quite right. There's not really any Snyder Cut news, so we're going to jump. We're not just going to talk about the Snyder Cut for clickbait. That's not what I'm going to do here. Yesterday, Superman was 84 years old, and you know what reverence I hold the big S in. He is the character. He is the best superhero of all time. So here I've got a little list. I'm sure we've done this before, but we're going to do it again. These are my top picks. These are my top 8 Superman movies of all time, from worst to best. So at number 8, Justice League. Now, Justice League's not at the bottom because of the clusterfuck of a movie it is. Justice League's at the bottom because of the way it uses Superman. I don't like the idea of Superman being a cameo character in his own film. And there's not really much evidence that Zack's Justice League treats him any differently. I'm sure he gets more scenes, he wears the black suit, blah-de-blah-de-blah, but I still don't think we see him as much in Justice League, whether it's Zack's version or Justice League. But we'll see. Hopefully, Superman's got a starring turn in this movie. I hope so. I really hope so, and I hope I'm pleased with it. But yeah, he's literally just there. He smiles, he punches Steppenwolf a couple of times. He shares a couple of jokes with Barry Allen. I like the race and the pre-credit sequence. It's pretty cool. But this film really isn't about Superman. I don't really know who this film is actually about. I know who this film was originally about and what the story was. But That's why it's at the bottom. Superman is barely in this movie, and you can't just stand there and bring him in an hour and a half into the movie and expect people to accept it. So that's why Justice League is the worst film to ever feature Superman. Now, Superman 4 is an interesting film. Superman 4 isn't at the bottom or second to the bottom because I think it's a terribly written movie. I think it's a terribly budgeted movie. I think the cost of the movie, they stripped the film of its budget. They asked Christopher Reeve and the other writer and the director, Sidney J. Furie, to just work with a little bit of a budget. And that wasn't right. That was wrong. And I was watching it this morning because I put it on for my dad, because me and my dad used to watch Superman together as a kid. And there's that moment where he's with the real estate guy because he wants to sell the Kent farm, and they're playing baseball. And when the guy throws the ball at Superman, he pretends to miss. And then after he goes, he hits a great shot, and the baseball goes up to space. And I think this is the kind of thing about Superman. This is what you have to balance. That he has to live a lie. He has to pretend he's not athletic, that he's not super strong. And he doesn't do it for himself. He does it to protect us. We must never know who he is. Otherwise, he really can't ever be Superman. In terms of Superman 4, it has some interesting moments. Look, there is an extended cut of Superman 4. You know, we're fighting for the Snyder Cut, but Zach talks about the rabbit hole, but the rabbit hole at Warner Brothers and DC live action is actually deeper than we ever thought. So, you know, Superman 4 could have been a great movie. But ultimately, the moment the Reeves Superman series died is when the Salkinds sacked Dick Donner. That was a great tragedy. He had 4 or 5 films planned with the great, iconic, legendary late Tom Mankiewicz, who also kind of rewrote many, many Bond movies as well, a very talented man. And he pretty much rewrote Superman the movie as well. So that's a shame, and that's why we got to what Superman 4 was. Very sad, because Christopher Reeve even refused to market the movie in the end, because he just felt betrayed. He came back, he had the idea of having Superman ridding the world of nuclear weapons and showing us the consequences of that action, why Superman can't solve all our real-world problems. So it was an interesting idea that couldn't be executed well because Golan Globus, who bought the distribution rights, offered the Salkinds just wanted to make a cheap movie so they can make a bunch of other movies. Very, very, as I say, very sad and very tragic. So what's next? Superman 3 is next. Superman 3 isn't a horrible film. It's a bit like Superman 4. When I first saw it, I quite enjoyed it. I like the spectacle. I like the fact that Chris is Superman and he plays him again in a very charming, brilliant way. Superman 3 decided to kind of bench Margot Kidder as Lois Lane because she was very vocal about the Salkinds dismissing Dick Donner as director. And so they decided to get rid of her and bring in Annette O'Toole as Lana Lang. So they did the whole, you know, girl from back home story. I thought that Annette is a great actor. She was great as Martha Kent in Smallville as well. But yeah, look, this film's okay. It's very comedy based. There's a lot of talking, very little action, by the way, until we get to the end kind of half an hour when Superman's fighting the supercomputer. The commentary in this film is about computers. It isn't done in an interesting way. I thought Gus Gorman was funny and interesting, but I tell you what, I know a lot of people talk about Ilya Salkinds' kind of original screenplay for Superman 3 and how it was crazy and nuts and Superman and Supergirl were going to fall in love and nonsense like that. But he did have the idea of Mixel Pickling. He did have the idea of doing Brainiac and things like that. His actual story was nuts, and I mean nuts. But the idea to bring in Brainiac and Mixel Pixelic and Superman and Superman and Supergirl meeting and having this kind of young girl, older cousin kind of relationship would have been a great idea. And why they didn't just take his idea and give it to someone who actually was sane, I don't know. Superman 3 could have been amazing, but again, part of the consequences with parting company with Dick Donner. Superman Returns. Now, this is an interesting one. Superman Returns. Now, I remember the marketing and the build-up to this film. I was so freaking excited. Really was. And, we all rated Bryan Singer back then. And don't say you didn't. X-Men and X-Men 2 were two of the early days superhero movies. Without those films, there'd be no Marvel Cinematic Universe. Feige was involved with them as well. He was always been in the background of Marvel, even before the MCU. So a really creative, talented guy. But the credit for X-Men and X-Men 2 is totally on Singer. Not a comic book fan, but he researched the comics and he got it. So we were all really excited that Singer was going to be doing Superman. But he was making all the right noises about loving Dick Donner's Superman, how he wanted to continue that franchise. Now, originally, I didn't see a problem with this. The problem with Superman Returns is that, despite what people say, Brandon Routh looks nothing like Christopher Reeve, in my opinion. He's not even as tall as Christopher Reeve. He doesn't even act, really. They try and get him to act in places like Christopher Reeve, but it doesn't work. And when you go to the Daily Planet, it doesn't look like the Daily Planet we saw in the original films. The universes look different. And I think what Bryan Singer did wrong with this, he was caught in two situations. Oh, I want to continue a classic franchise, but I also want to do my own thing. Well, basically, Brian, what you should have done is been the continuation and just did your kind of your own thing. Superman has a son he doesn't know about in this movie, Jason. That could have been Connor Kent. They could have done that whole story. That would have been awesome, and it would have set up a great future for the Superman movie franchise. I think there's many, many good things about Superman Returns. There's the return to Krypton sequence when Brandon Routh plays a blinder and he returns to Krypton and he sees the remainder of the planet, and it's amazing, and he gets kind of weakened with all the kryptonite flying about. It's great. It feels great. It's emotional, but they cut it out the movie. Warner Brothers, again, messing with somebody's movie, and that was a long time ago. That was 2006. Don't forget. And then the movie didn't do too well. Then they were going to make a sequel. Then they weren't because of the writer's strike, and they changed their mind. They got talking to Christopher Nolan and David Goyer. The decision was also made to cancel Smallville because they decided to do a cinematic universe. Smallville was so utterly popular, it became problematic to them. They couldn't have a film verse and Smallville going, well, I don't agree with that, but that's how they thought. And so things changed very quickly, and Bryan Singer's Superman Returns was a one movie. I still think there's elements of this film that are really good. Spacey is a mixture of Hackman's Lex and Michael Rosenbaum's Lex. It does work it works more when he's the darker Lex rather than kind of quoting Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor. And this is the problem. If Bryan Singer did his own thing, it really would have been an amazing movie. There's lots of question marks about this movie. I think you can watch it and say, this was okay, that was a problem, this was a problem. I still think I would have given it a sequel if I was Warner Brothers. He could have fixed the mistakes, but it didn't happen. And again, the character of Superman is damaged because Warner Brothers decide not to continue the saga, aka after what happened with Justice League. So what's next after Superman Returns? So BVS is number 4 on my list. Don't at me. BVS has a great vision for Superman. It wants to deconstruct the character. It wants to deconstruct the character and basically show what it's like for Superman. Really newly arrived in this world, we saw what happened in Man of Steel and the destruction, and people don't trust him. Some people do. There's a divide. Some people see him as a hero and some people don't. But ultimately, he proves himself in the end by sacrificing his life and killing Doomsday. And I think that the commentary for Superman is really good. It is what's weird about Batman v Superman compared to Man of Steel. The Man of Steel Superman is a lot more lighter. There's a lot more smiling. There's a lot more levity. In this film, there's very, very little levity for Superman because it's a deconstruction of a character. They're doing the same with Batman, but you can get away with being dark with Batman because that's really the core tone of his character. But I do like BVS. I love what they did with Superman. I love the commentary on the character, and it's just a shame it wasn't so received. I can understand how diehard comic book characters could get triggered by the Superman and BVS, so I do understand all sides of it, but for me personally, it's a great movie. It's a great version of Superman, and this was just telling the early day story of Superman on Earth. And they were trying to do it in a relatable, realistic way. Unfortunately, it wasn't received as well as it could have done. So BVS is at number 4. Number 3 is Superman 2. My choices now are emotional. They're not logical. They're not going to be your choices. These are my choices. I am not making commentary that one film is better than the other. I will never put Superman films up against each other. This just is a fun ranking at the end of the day. So Superman 2, I love this film. I think this film is beyond its time, whether you're talking about Dick Donner's version or Richard Lester's version. And I quite like Lester's version. I think it has a mixture of levity and action. But this is a great story. You know, Superman is so focused on Lois at the beginning of this story. He even sacrifices himself being Superman so he can be with her. After Jor-El says, you can't keep your powers and be with this woman. So what happens is then Zod arrives, right? Through Superman's actions as well. It's Superman's fault, unintentionally, that Zod and the 2 other villains break free in space from the Phantom Zone. So while Superman's, Clark or Kal, whatever you want to call him, is, developing his relationship with Lois, all hell is breaking loose. He's in the fortress. He doesn't know what's going on. And then the whole thing in the cafe, in the kind of trucker's cafe, when he gets the shit kicked out of him, when he gets his arse handed to him by the trucker guy, right? I think it's really good. It's really good. Superman can't fight. He's never learned how to fight. He's got powers, but he's never been really trained. I would have thought Jor-El might teach him a few Kryptonian moves, but he doesn't, right? So basically he gets his arse handed to him, and that's realistic without his powers. And then when they put the TV on and Zod comes on and the president's there, it's so iconic. Superman, can you hear me? Who is this Superman? Come to me, Superman, if you dare. Defy me! No! Before Zod! I love it. Sorry, I got carried away there, but I love it. I think it's so good. So Superman 2 really is the first superhero film. Well, it's the only superhero film back then that has supervillains and a superhero against each other. And it really works. The effects stand up to this day. I think it's amazing. They're using their heat vision, the super breath. I like the bit when they think Superman's been crushed by the bus. I like the bit when he catches the kind of pole and he looks down at the woman sitting on the pavement and she's waving and smiling, and it brings tears to my heart. And Reeve does this smile at her as, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to protect you. And it's so beautiful. This is why I love Christopher Reeve's Superman. This is why he's always ranked higher than any of the others, because Reeve really believed in what he was doing. When you look at him, you think, Jesus, imagine him in Man of Steel. Imagine him in Superman Returns and in BVS. He was such a good actor. He was the perfect Superman. And I love the others. We're going to talk about my ranking of those actors as well. And I'm not dealing with Heckling or Dean Cain. Not interested in them. They're not my Supermen, and I won't even talk about them. But anyway, yeah, so Superman 2 is such a good film. So there are 2 Superman movies left. What is at number 2 will trigger a lot of you. But again, this is not commentary on how I feel about this film. Number 2 is Man of Steel. Man of Steel came at a very exciting time for me. The trailers, the build-up, the marketing, what Snyder had to say, what Nolan had to say, what Goya had to say. This film is a visual masterpiece, and it's an emotional masterpiece. And Henry Cavill is perfect as Superman. Everyone is perfect in the roles they are cast for. Especially Michael Shannon as General Zod. You know, we've spoken about him already. He really isn't a villain. He's a guy doing villainous things, and we discussed that a couple of days ago, and I don't want to go over old ground. But Man of Steel has the perfect Lois, with the perfect Perry White. Disappointed that Zack doesn't rate Jimmy Olsen as a character enough to make him a full-time character on the franchise. That is disappointing, because I've always felt Jimmy Olsen is like the companion in Doctor Who. It's like you and me being best friends with Superman. So I do think he's important. But Zack doesn't agree, and we're just going to have to agree to disagree there. But look, Man of Steel is a brilliant film, and the effects are still second to none today. No one can make an effects movie like Zack Snyder. And a lot of people have said it. Imagine the type of Star Wars film he could direct if George Lucas actually wrote it. Imagine that. The 2 legends. being involved with a Star Wars film together. How amazing would that be? But I have nothing negative to say about Man of Steel. It's very different to Superman the movie. It should be different to Superman the movie. It has a very realistic, blustering tone. It's emotional. I love having Costner. Costner and Russell Crowe as the two fathers was just genius casting, and it really does work. The reason Superman the movie is #1 on my list is not because I think it's a better film than Man of Steel. I think they're equally as good as each other. I will never put them up against each other. But for me personally, Superman the movie was the first film I ever saw. Superman the movie is the reason I love Superman to this day, and it holds a very special place in my heart. As I say, this choice is emotional, not logical. Do you know what I mean? And so I just feel that Zack is a genius and he created a great film, but he did have nearly 300 million to spend. He did have all the bells and whistles, and he had all the VFX techniques that he could use better than anyone. And it looks great. Some people don't even know how to do great CGI. It's not just a case of being able to do the CGI, but Dick Donner had to spend nearly 3 years making this movie. This movie nearly broke Dick Donner. It gave him chest pains. It gave him a nervous breakdown. The Salkans were pressuring him over the budget. They nearly sacked him. They brought in Lester to be an intermediary. Look, the videos are out there, and it's an amazing story. And as I say, he created a brilliant film, having to do all the effects and do groundbreaking blue touch paper, create new kind of techniques to make Superman fly. And I think the flying for Superman and Superman the movie still stands up today. It does for me. I think it looks amazing. Partly Donner's genius and the people he had working with him, but also Reeves' body language and his shape was amazing. When I see Reeves fly, it's majestic, it's special, and I still don't feel any Superman actor, even with all the CGI, and I'm including Cavill and Ralph, have ever mastered the flying that Reeves did. And that's because he was very acrobatic. He was what those things you do when you fly up in the air? Anyway, I don't know, but he did all that. So he knew how to do his body shape. Look, he was amazing, and his face expressions, it was perfection. Reeves on Superman as Superman was the perfect storm. So that's my top Superman movie. They're my top 8 picks from worst to best. Comment down below. Let me know what you think of all of that. Now, my top 3 Superman actors. Again, this is going to trigger people. Henry Cavill, 3. Tom Welling, 2. Christopher Reeve, 1. Now, you're going to say, why is Tom Welling above Henry Cavill? I don't really have much to say about Tom Welling as a person. He really showed a lack of love and respect for the character, with some of the things he was saying in the final 3 seasons of Smallville when Alan Miles left. Also, making the decision to come to the Arrowverse crossover and agreeing to do that horrible thing where Superman gives up his powers to be with his family, and I've spoken about this before. Superman can be a father. Superman can be a father and a hero. Are you telling me when my dad went to work and came home at 6 o'clock at night when I was a kid, he was a lesser of a father? Or when my mother used to sew upstairs and left me to watch TV, she was lesser of a mother. They had to bring in the money. Why can't Superman, a man who can, travel in light speed, right? Not as fast as the Flash, but pretty fast, can't go and save someone and come home to feed and play with his kids? Why would you have to give up your powers to be 24/7 at home with Lois Lane? It was terrible. And for Tom to agree to it shows the lack of understanding and respect he has for the Superman character. But the reason he's second and above Henry Cavill, again, it's an emotional decision. Because despite me saying all this about Tom and his refusal to wear the suit, that's another discussion as well. The way he played him, the idea of his version of Clark Kent is just beautiful. It's character driven. This could have been an HBO, story of how Superman becomes Superman. It's a brilliant story. Tom does really well. He starts off as a really raw actor and really hones his craft by the 10th season. And he kept himself clean. There was never, ever any kind of, Tom Welling's been caught smoking or drinking or taking drugs. And I mean, when you're playing Superman, especially for the length of time Tom was doing it, doing a couple of films is one thing. But he was Clark Kent, a.k.a. Superman, for a decade. He kept it clean. he worked hard, and his performances had such intellect and intelligence, and so good. And his version of Clark Kent is amazing. And I say half of that is Alan Miles and the people who worked on the show, but also he worked really hard. It's just a shame in the end. I do feel betrayed by some of his actions and thoughts about Superman, and that is disappointing. Of course, number one is Christopher Reeve. For all the reasons I've just spoke about, he also came back and special guest starred on Smallville as Dr. Virgil Swan, a scientist and astronomer who tells Clark who he is and where he's from. Christopher Reeve was amazing. He is the ultimate Superman. I know everyone won't agree with that. I still love Henry Cavill. I think he's an amazing Superman, but Christopher Reeve was special to my generation. He was our first Superman, and he was perfect for the role. But this is a democracy, not a dictatorship, so you get to comment down below and tell me, what rankings do you have for all the Superman movies, and who is your favourite Superman? Am I right? Am I wrong? What would you do? Would you swap Reeve for Cavill? What do you think of Tom Welling? Let me know. Constructive comments down below. Like, share and subscribe. And I'll be back tomorrow with even more DCEU Daily. See you again soon.